Hey guys, welcome back to Disney Coffee and Book Talk. I am Alex. If you are new here, welcome. If you are not new here, also welcome. We welcome everyone. So, I finished ARC reading. If you guys don't know what an ARC read is, it's an advanced reader copy. I do get majority of mine from NetGalley. I have a whole video about NetGalley. I'm trying to work through my reads right now. Anywho, I ARC read The Museum of Lost Dreams by Christine Nolfi. This book does come out June 23rd, so in a few months. I have a lot of thoughts and opinions. If you follow me on TikTok, you'll see that I did 2 videos. I did it first half and then second half. Wasn't like intending to do it that way. It just kind of happened. But here are my full thoughts for our YouTube platform, because I know I haven't been posting and I should have been. So I will give this book a 3 stars. There's a lot that I want to say in regards to this book. So starting off, we have a lot of different characters and you're kind of going back and forth between time. So you have your prologue where you have, I can't even think of her name, I'm sorry, she's not like a super big character, but we start off with this young woman watching this little girl, this 3-year-old, and her parents interact, and she's really concerned after learning that this could be related to her brother. Okay, keep that in mind, okay? Because I was like, how is that coming into play? Like, then we switch over to, we get to know Valerie Van Horn. She is this very independent woman, very intelligent. She had immigrated from Poland, and she was determined to be in academia. She wanted to be the first female professor, woman professor at Harvard and Vassar. She went to Vassar and then she wanted to work at Harvard. And so a lot of that is stemming from her prestigious, I don't know if I would use that word. She's very determined to do that. And we're talking the early 1900s, right? 1930s, around 1940s. Now, it doesn't mean that women weren't working, especially white women were working, but were they working in academia? Not so much. And especially, you know, people still looked they still look at women, right? Like, oh, you have to settle down and have kids. And she's like, that's really not what I want to do in life. Like, that's not what I ever imagined. However, she does end up falling in love, and the guy that she falls in love with is promised to another woman. It gets complicated, but I personally wouldn't call it an affair, because he wasn't with the other woman at the time. He was promised to, and they were trying to figure it out. But they end up having a child together, and he breaks off the relationship with Valerie and disappears. That's going to come much later. But this is important. This part is really important. So Valerie, she can't be seen as like a single, a single parent. Like, it's seen as a failure, especially in academia. And if he was around, again, this will come, we find out a little bit more later in the book. I'm not trying to like speed ahead, but it is important that he had to leave, one, because he was promised to this woman, and if he didn't marry her, his father would completely ruin her. Number 2 is Valerie gives birth to Shayla, okay? But in order for her reputation to remain, because people would look down on her because other people thought she was having an affair, she had to forge adoption papers. So it made it look like Shayla was adopted. So Shayla's growing up believing she's adopted, and she's being emotionally abused by her mother, Valerie, who's very determined to have this prestigious career. And let me say, as a woman and as a mother and as, someone who is in academia, and yes, I know we're in 2026, and as an adoptee, because I am an adoptee and I do talk about adoption, Valerie was a shit mother. I'm gonna say what I said. And it's not because of her career, but it's the fact that she continued to lie to her child and the emotional abuse by being away from her because she chose to be. Like, even when she was physically in the house, she did not spend time with her child. She kind of shoved her child off on her housekeeper. Now, thankfully, her housekeeper's amazing. Shayla, really had a good connection. But there was always something missing for Shayla. I'm not trying to speed ahead, but it's going to come into play. Anyway, so as it turns out, Shayla has a talk with her mother, Valerie, at the age of 13. After Shayla had gotten into another fight at school, she had been bullied about being adopted. And this is when the housekeeper said, "You have to tell her. Like, this is ridiculous. You are lying to her." Because Shayla kept saying, why can't the housekeeper just adopt me? Like, it would be so much better. She at least loves me. So that's when Valerie sits her down and explains, like, hey, you're not actually adopted. The papers were forged. I'm your biological mother. But it's complicated with your father. And she's like, well, who's my father? Like, I have the right to know. And Valerie, this is what really, really pissed me off. I think it would piss me off even if I wasn't adopted. I cannot tell you for sure because I've always been adopted, but excuse me. And even as a mother myself, the audacity for her to say this, but, and I quote, Valerie says, well, this is my life, not yours. Excuse me? Excuse the fuck out of me? Does she just not exist in your world? Like, that's exactly what you're saying. Like I said, I was struggling so bad through this part because I'm like, you're talking about adoption. I really wish more books just didn't have adoption related stuff as an adoptee. And I do have a whole other platform about adoption. And I do talk about adoption on my TikTok more. And I try to avoid it here unless it's, media related. And something else Valerie said was, well, you probably would have been better off adopted. At least you would have been loved. So the misconceptions there are utterly disgusting. But this also does not surprise me the way that Shayla was lashing out even before 13. And then the way that she continued to lash out. She didn't get to know her father because her mother refused to give her any information. Even though Shayla wasn't actually adopted, her thinking she's adopted, which, by the way, Ted Bundy's a perfect example of this. And I'm not saying Shayla's going to go that route, but the idea that it fucks with your head is exactly that. It puts her at a higher risk. And so Shayla turns to drugs. Adoptees are 4.25 times more likely to turn to substance abuse and alcohol to deal with their problems. That is statistical facts. You guys can look it up. But that is the reality. So for the rest of the time that we kind of understand Shayla, she did exactly that. She turned first to weed. Okay, I'm not saying it's a gateway drug. Hey, people do it. I don't care. But then she went to harder drugs, especially after she met the man that she ends up marrying and having children with. So she has Bessie. Bessie's the oldest. That is the our main character throughout the majority of the book. And at this point, Bessie, as an adult, had moved away. She could not deal with this. Shayla had emotionally also abused and neglected Bessie and her Bessie's two younger siblings, the twins, who were young, like preteens, right? Bessie comes back when they're 14, so I just want to make it clear. But Caleb and Casey, they're fraternal twins. At the age of like 10, 11, there was a boat accident. This was before Bessie left to work overseas. There was a really bad boat accident with Bessie and Caleb. Caleb had rushed to the boat in a rainstorm, and Bessie's like, we can't be doing this, and she's trying to stop him, but she couldn't, and she tried to save anyway, basically they're physically kind of okay, like they did get hurt because it's an accident, but Caleb ended up having a TBI, a traumatic brain injury. And so the rest of the book is dealing with Caleb having a traumatic brain injury, just wanting to make that clear. And Casey, who's his twin, blames Bessie, not understanding the full context of everything. She's blaming Bessie for other things because Shayla, their mother, was pitting Bessie against Shayla and everyone else, because Bessie had inherited the estate from their grandmother, Valerie, Shayla's mother. Shayla never got it because she was so heavy into drugs, and Valerie was worried that something would happen to the estate, and she worked really hard for this house and for everything and all the money, and she really wanted her grandchildren, because at that time only Bessie was alive, her grandchild to have a future and whoever, go do something good with your life. So when Valerie passed, Bessie inherited everything, and with the help of the housekeeper, she learned to budget. She gave her mother and her father an allowance, basically, and because they couldn't live within that means because of the heavy drug use, they hated her. Meanwhile, they're taking off at random, traveling, leaving her and her siblings behind. Mind you, they didn't care that they were leaving. The children didn't care as much because it was very peaceful when they were gone, but that's how chaotic it was, right? So at this point, this is 3 years post the boat accident, Shayla and her husband, I don't even remember if she said his name, like it was just in fleeting, went to Brazil for whoever knows what and get killed. So Bessie finds out she has to fly back. She now has guardianship over her siblings. She obviously has the inheritance already, so she's trying to figure things out. Like, I can't go back overseas to work because they're my responsibility. She has to deal with the funeral and all that. So she is now back in, this takes place in right off Seneca Lake, so upstate New York in the Finger Lakes. So Bessie returns to deal with all this, and she comes across Luke, who was her love interest, her lover, her best friend, the love of her life. And although he's mad at her for leaving, he's also kind of not. He understands. But I think that if she had asked him to go with her, he probably would have, but she never did. She never once did that. So he had stayed in their town, and while she's gone, during those 3 years where Shayla and her husband are being terrible parents, he was still looking after the kids. Really, the housekeeper was really taking care of them, but he would keep an eye out because he worked at the high school, and he had special needs education, so he was working with Caleb and like he was really there for them. So when he finds out about the death of Shayla and her husband, you know, he understood that Bess needed help, right? Bessie needed help in more than one ways, you know, not just emotionally, but he was like, hey, listen, I know you have to bring their remains back to the United States. I know someone that, you know, went through this a few years ago. Let me get the information. And after he did that, he goes, let me take this off your plate, make your life easier. Now, that is showing that even when they're not in a relationship, if a man wanted to, he absolutely would. This is not the only example of Luke doing this, also not the only man in this book. That shows, you know, if a man wanted to, he would, and we're going to get to that. But Luke really took the reins, and he really helped in so many ways. So that was really, really awesome to see. We also see that Bessie and Casey, right, her younger sister, rekindle their sisterly relationship. And although it's really not Bessie's responsibility, even though she's the guardian, she ended up having to explain some of the things, like a little bit about the boat accident, and then the way that, like I said, Shayla was pitting them against each other because of the inheritance. And while Bessie didn't go into full detail about like all of the drug use, she goes, hey, like they were using heavy drugs. They couldn't stick to this allowance, and that is why she was upset. And she goes like, I didn't even use the inheritance. Like, I've been working, and everything that I've earned is actually what I gave them allowance for, and I've paid for everything. The inheritance has sat untouched other than like them living in the house. And she said, like, you know, when you're older, I want to find something, right? Whether it's doing a charity or having a business together, where I don't want you to worry about your future. And I think in part it really, really helped their relationship. But also Casey said, and again, they're 14. She goes, listen, Bessie, you're my sister. I know that you're like my guardian, but I don't want you to treat me like you're my mother. I want you to treat me like I'm your sister. And I think that really like hit home. And also Casey had to come to terms that it really wasn't Bessie's fault, that Caleb was very persistent, and she knew this, and that kind of led to the accident. And it really wasn't Bessie's fault. Like she did try to stop the whole thing. So she ends up like understanding all of this, which is great, awesome, love that. Okay, now as they're dealing with all this, and they're coming up with the idea that because Bessie is really into working with charities, she decides she wants to start her own, that she's going to work with special needs kids, because Caleb and Casey still has a very close relationship with him, and they're like, well, what about a summer camp, right? It's much needed. Let's do that. So as they're coming up with this plan to create a summer camp for special needs kids in the area, they're using Valerie's office, and they're like cleaning it out. And this is when Casey finds out that Valerie, their grandmother, had a safe. Now, the safe had already been cleaned out. Like, Casey had already actually seen the documents prior. They weren't like super important. But as it turns out, there was something left in like the very bottom that they find, and it's some photographs. And it's photographs of their grandfather. Sorry guys, I'm getting emotional at this part. Whew. So Shayla looks almost identical to this man. right? Their mother looks identical to their grandfather. They don't know his name, but they're like, okay, like, who is this? They have to find out. So they're searching, right? Bessie's going, dealing with a lot between like starting this charity and searching things up. She doesn't want to get the hopes up of the children, you know, rekindling her love with Luke. So as it turns out, they find out that someone that their housekeeper is friends with happens to be the sister of this man that is their grandfather. So they meet with their aunt, really it's their aunt, right? And she was like, oh yeah, that's my brother. I found out much later, Bessie, you were 3, the twins weren't around yet. She was like, this is where the prologue comes in. She goes like, I saw, you know, X, Y, and Z. That was the prologue. But we didn't know how to interact because of the way that your mother was. And Julius, who they find out is the grandfather, wanted to have a relationship with his daughter, Shayla. But at that time that he found out all the information that she was heavy in drugs and he just couldn't get disappointed. But he was still interacting with Shayla and the children. They just didn't know it. So as it turns out, Julius bought a house, right? The grandfather bought a house down the street from them. And when they went to the house, they're waiting for him to return because he's like down on the beach, like it's right off the lake. So the aunt goes to get her brother, and they're waiting in the house. That's just how it was at the time, right? We're talking at this point, it's like 1970s. And Luke is with them, and Luke is like kind of looking, but he's looking at the pictures, and he calls Bessie over, and he goes, Bessie, you have to see this. Again, I'm trying not to cry because this is very emotional. There are 2 photographs that are, you know, up. One is him with Shayla and Bess in the background when Bess was little. So even though they didn't know that was, you know, he was related, he was still around. He was very neighborly. He was very friendly. He knew the whole time, or at least at this point, but he didn't tell them because he didn't know how to, you know, interact. And then a second picture that was up was they were by the dock, also like by the beach, and Shayla is there with Bessie and the twins, so they were very little, and Luke, who was also young, because Luke and Bessie were best friends for like ever, and then, you know, friends to lovers here. And as it turns out, Julius made sure he was right there. Even though he had been married to another woman, he always wanted to be in Shayla's life. There is letters to that. I still want to be in her life. Even if I have to hide that I am her biological father, I want to be in her life. And it was Valerie who said no. And this is where it gets frustrating because Valerie is very selfish in many ways, right? Not only does Shayla deserve to know who her father was, and I think this really, really impacted her in many ways, not having that genetic, cultural connection and that loss of someone that could love you. But the emotional abuse that she faced from her mother. And then Shayla then basically did the same thing to Bess, right? And essentially the twins too. So it was really hard, but again, like if a man wanted to, he would, right? He was still there. He was still interacting, even though he didn't come out and exactly be like, Shayla, like I'm your father, or, you know, to Bessie and the twins, well, to Casey at least, like, hey, I'm your grandfather, I'm Shayla's dad. Like, he was still around. Okay, so they have their initial meeting, and then they decide to meet up at the museum. What they call the museum is the actual estate. He actually bought that house with Valerie to have a family before he was really forced to marry this other woman. So I want to make that clear. But that was his family. So they have that initial meeting. Bessie said, okay, like, I want you two to come over one day. We're gonna have a meal and we're all gonna talk and we're gonna slowly introduce ourselves. So between those two, between the initial meeting and then that dinner, Julius and his sister did immense research about how to interact with Caleb due to his traumatic brain injury, and found the same way that they were trying to help him with the flashcards. And without even Bessie or Luke or Casey telling them any of this, they came over and that's the first thing that they did. And Bessie's looking at them like, holy mackerel, like, they care that much to do research. And they said, like, look, we know that you're starting up this charity for special needs kids. We have a lot of the research. You can have it. This will save you time. Also, knowing you're trying to start up a camp and you have to build the actual campground, Julius was a very well-known architect. He goes, let me help you. Let me help you design it so that is in the best interest of the children. And he did. And he did. At 80, in his early 80s, this man is helping his family, right? Sorry. And Julius's sister, who is vastly younger, she's like 20 years younger, so she's in her 60s, makes a really good connection with Casey, who's 14, but she's like, listen, like, let my house be open to you. You can have sleepovers. We can, you can go through my jewelry. I don't have children of my own. Let me teach you how to sew and thrift and all that. And so Casey has another woman in her life to love her and be a support. Okay. Now, before I fully end, because it gets even better, one more thing. If a man wanted to, he would. We come back to Luke. Well, both Luke and Julius at this point, but it's really Luke. So Luke at this whole time had been working at the high school, right? So they finished completing the entire campground is now built, right? He had helped her throughout all of this. They are now engaged, and he turns to her and he goes, Liz, I want to ask you something before I do it, right? He goes, I really want to quit my job so that I could work with you and your charity and take a lot of that casework, that all of that stuff that you need to do off your plate. Let me help you. And she was like, yes. First of all, we're gonna have to speed up the wedding because also I'm pregnant, but that's not even like yes. Like, it was just like an immediate yes. It was just so cute. And like Julius kept like pushing Luke, like, tell her. Like, oh my gosh, it was just so cute. But yes, the first part of this book really like pissed me off. And I will say again, due to that adoption thing, and then like not really adopted, but the papers were forged, but how you make someone feel as an adoptee and also the teasing and all that really pissed me off. And like, even Bessie, as she is finding out this information and learning about Julius and all this, the more she looked at her grandmother, who she deeply loved and had an amazing connection with, she looked at her differently. And it just goes to show that like, you just never really know someone. But yeah, I will say I just struggled, and I think that's why I give it really the 3 stars. The ending, like, it's really emotional for me. I definitely want to cry about it, like, in a happy way, like, oh my gosh, that's so sweet. Like, I love Julius, as the grandpa. I love Luke, you know, we have the kids, they don't like, obviously there's no fault to the children, but like, well, yes, I don't like their mother, Shayla, because of what she chose to do and emotionally abuse her children. Um, I can also understand the substance abuse part because of the way that she was treated. Like I said, kind of, not exactly, but a little bit. That's pretty much my part. I will say I really did like the book. I had previously read The Secret Library of Hannah Reeves by Christine Nolfi, also was an ARC read, which I really enjoyed. So seeing that she wrote another book, I was like, oh, let me, you know, pick this up. And I guess it just wasn't what I expected, but I did enjoy it. Very heavy, very emotional. It makes sense why she used the adoption part or the fake adoption and all of this to get to the end plot. But I did like the difference in the surprise, if that makes sense. And you do see all of these different characters, you know, change over time. Even the housekeeper, right? Like even the children were like, oh, she's sick, let us, like, we know that she likes steel oats, let us like make her breakfast in bed. Like, we love her, she's like a mother to us. Like, she really is the mother hen. And they're like, she needs a life, like she deserves friends, she deserves time off. So it was nice to have that part as well, and really treat, even though she was an employee, they really did treat her like she was family, right? They really did see her as an actual mother and not an employee. But in the end, I really just don't like Valerie. Like, congrats, you made your career, but also like, look at how your family remembers you, right? And I feel like for me, family is the most important thing. And to say that to a child, this is my life, not yours. No, like, what are they, a non-existent? Like, not even a ghost. Like, they're just pretend. Like, it's her life too. Like, what do you... Sorry. Anyway, that is my whole review. I know it's a lot longer than my TikTok one. You guys got a little bit more in-depth stuff, so just keep that in mind. But this, just a reminder, this book does come out June 23rd. I do hope you guys go check it out. I didn't give too much away. It was really well written. It was very emotional. Like I said, I was all over the place. I was really angry, and then I was like, okay, like, what's happening here? And then happy cries. So Christine Nolfi did a fantastic job, but again, I would give it a 3 just because of that first half and me being pissed off about all that and my emotional connection to adoption, because I'm, again, sick of just people in general, you know, not just any specific author, but just overall using adoption to use in their books or media and usually doing it wrong. But I think that Christine Nolfi did a fantastic job kind of displaying some of the same risks and trauma responses, even though Shayla was not actually adopted, she thought she was adopted. And that does make a huge difference. She still lacked a lot of the same things that we did. So there's that. Anyway, have a fantastic day, and I will see you guys next time for another video.